In the heart of medieval England, when kingdoms were built on courage and loyalty, there lived a man whose name echoed through every battlefield, King Richard I, known as the Lionheart. He was not just born into royalty. He earned his place in history through valor, faith, and unwavering leadership. His story is not only about crowns and conquests, but about how a single man, guided by conviction and discipline, rose above betrayal, imprisonment, and endless war to leave behind a legacy that still inspires the world today. Every man faces his own battlefield, some with swords, others with struggles of life. But Richard's story teaches us one timeless truth. Greatness is not given, it's proven. He stood firm when his own people doubted him. He fought with honor when greed surrounded him, and even when he was far from home, facing enemies stronger and more numerous, he showed that true leadership shines not in comfort, but in crisis. The Lionheart reminds us that victory is not about how loud you roar, but how steady your heart remains when the storm rages. England in the 12th century was a land of power, politics, and constant struggle. It was an age where kings ruled not just by words, but by the strength of their swords and the loyalty of their men. In this age of knights and crusades, a child was born who would one day become one of the most celebrated monarchs of English history, Richard Plantagenet, later known as Richard the Lionheart. He was the son of King Henry Roman II and Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, a queen famed for her wisdom, influence, and strength. From his earliest days, Richard was surrounded by tales of valor, faith, and conquest. The royal courts were alive with talk of knights, wars, and honor, and these stories became the foundation of his spirit. And like many princes who were content to enjoy royal luxury, Richard was different. Even as a boy, he had the eyes of a warrior, calm, sharp, and unyielding. He loved not the silks and banquets of the palace, but the clash of steel and the call of adventure. His tutors taught him Latin, poetry, and philosophy, but his heart belonged to the discipline of combat. He trained relentlessly, mastering the sword, the bow, and the art of command. Soldiers who saw him train spoke of his courage and focus. He didn't fight for sport. He fought to learn, to prepare himself for something far greater. Richard grew up amidst conflict. His family was powerful but divided. His father, King Henry Roman II, was a brilliant yet stubborn ruler, and his sons were ambitious and impatient. Political tensions between Henry and his children often turned into rebellion. Richard watched these conflicts closely, learning that power without discipline destroys families and empires alike. This taught him early on that leadership was not just about strength, it was about wisdom, timing, and self-control. Though he clashed with his father in later years, he inherited from him a keen mind for politics and war. As Richard matured, his mother, Eleanor, became his guiding light. She was strong, intelligent, and fiercely protective of her children. From her, Richard inherited not only royal blood, but also the courage and grace that defined his rule. Eleanor recognized her son's exceptional qualities and often reminded him that kingship was a trust from God, not a prize for ambition. She taught him the value of justice and honor, instilling in him the belief that true power comes with responsibility. Her teachings became the moral compass that guided him through the trials of life. By the time Richard reached his teenage years, his reputation had already begun to grow. He was known as a natural leader, fearless in battle, fair in judgment, and loyal to his men. At a young age, he was given command of armies in his mother's Duchy of Aquitaine, and there he proved himself worthy of the crown he would one day wear. Soldiers followed him not because he was a prince, but because he fought beside them, shared their hardships, and treated them with dignity. His ability to inspire men became his greatest strength. The training fields of Aquitaine became Richard's first battlegrounds. He faced rebellions, rival lords, and the challenges of leadership. Each victory sharpened his mind and steeled his heart. He learned to read the hearts of men, to know who could be trusted, who needed guidance, and who posed danger. These early experiences taught him the importance of strategy, patience, and faith. He began to see that battles are not won by force alone, but by foresight and unity. Even as a young commander, Richard displayed traits of mercy and justice that set him apart. He refused unnecessary cruelty, treating his prisoners with fairness. His men admired not just his strength, but his compassion. When others fought for greed or vengeance, Richard fought for duty. He understood that war was sometimes necessary, but honor must always guide the sword. This balance of power and righteousness would later earn him respect, not only from his allies, but also from his enemies. The people of Aquitaine and England began to speak of him with admiration. They saw in him a leader who could restore the kingdom's glory and bring stability to lands torn by conflict. He had become a symbol of hope for a better era, a prince who was both courageous and just. His fame spread across Europe, and foreign rulers began to take notice of the young English prince, whose bravery and skill were unmatched. But Richard's rise was not without struggle. His relationship with his father grew tense as he sought greater autonomy and recognition. Yet, through all the political storms, he never lost sight of his purpose, to prepare himself to lead. Each trial became a lesson, each conflict a teacher. He grew not through comfort, but through challenge. These early years shaped the foundation of the man who would one day be known as the Lionheart. By the time Richard reached manhood, he had earned a reputation as both a soldier and a statesman. His courage, discipline, and integrity set him apart in a world full of ambition and betrayal. Though he was still a prince, people already spoke of him as a king in spirit. The boy who had once trained in the courtyards of Aquitaine was now ready to face the storms of destiny, a destiny that would take him from the green fields of England to the battles, guard sands of the Holy Land, where history would remember him forever. After the death of King Henry Roman II, the Kingdom of England stood at a crossroads. The great empire Henry had built through strength and diplomacy was now on the edge of collapse. Rivals inside and outside the realm waited eagerly to divide what he had created. In that fragile moment of uncertainty stood Richard, no longer just a prince, but a man who would have to prove whether he could hold together a kingdom born of power and plagued by betrayal. From his youth, Richard had watched his father rule with a mix of wisdom and iron will. He had also seen the cracks forming within the royal family, ambition, jealousy, and rebellion. The struggle for the throne did not begin when Henry died. It began long before, within the very walls of his court. Richard's brothers fought for power, alliances shifted daily, and distrust grew like wildfire. It was in this chaos that Richard learned to trust action more than words and truth more than titles. When Henry Roman II finally passed, many questioned if Richard could control the vast empire that stretched from England to parts of France. He was young, and his reputation as a warrior was great, but ruling required more than bravery. It required patience, justice, and the wisdom to lead men who might never fully trust one another. Yet Richard stepped forward with calm determination. He did not seek the throne out of greed. He accepted it out of duty. The nobles and church leaders gathered to witness his coronation. As the crown touched his head, Richard knew the weight of it was not gold, It was responsibility. He was now the keeper of a nation divided by greed and fear, but he did not allow doubt to touch his heart. He prayed for strength and promised that his rule would be guided not by vengeance, but by fairness. Richard faced opposition from the start. Some lords remained loyal to his late father. Others plotted quietly in hopes of weakening the new king. Instead of striking in anger, Richard chose wisdom. He traveled across his lands, meeting his subjects, hearing their struggles, and showing them a king who cared not just for power, but for justice. His actions spoke louder than his words, and slowly the hearts of his people began to turn toward him. One of Richard's greatest strengths was his ability to forgive. Even those who once stood against him were offered mercy if they showed honesty and loyalty. This did not make him weak, it made him respected. People began to see that their new king was not a tyrant seeking to crush his enemies, but a leader seeking to unite his people under truth. In that unity lay the foundation of the strength that would soon make him one of history's most admired kings. While securing his throne, Richard also strengthened his armies. He understood that peace could not be guaranteed without preparation. He trained his soldiers, improved his defenses, and ensured that England would stand firm against any threat. His vision was clear. A stable and righteous kingdom could only exist if it was protected by discipline and guided by faith. As he organized his empire, Richard never forgot the lessons learned under his father's rule. He vowed not to repeat the mistakes that had divided the royal family. He ruled with transparency, rewarding loyalty and punishing treachery. Slowly but surely, the empire began to find balance again. Where there had been confusion, there was now order. Where there had been fear, there was now trust. Richard's rule was not without challenges, but what made him remarkable was his ability to turn obstacles into opportunities. Every rebellion he faced became a chance to show mercy. Every rival he defeated became a lesson in leadership. His calm strength and clear vision reminded his people that a true king does not rise by crushing others. He rises by lifting his nation. By the time Richard fully secured his throne, England was no longer the broken empire he had inherited. It was a united realm with a leader who inspired loyalty through courage and respect. The struggle for the throne had not just made him king, it had made him wise. It had tempered his heart and prepared him for the far greater challenges that awaited beyond his kingdom's borders. When Richard ascended the throne, his vision reached beyond the walls of England. He believed that leadership meant service, and service sometimes called for sacrifice. Across Europe, word spread of his courage, his skill, and his devotion to what he believed was right. The lands of the East were filled with tension, and the call for a new crusade echoed among rulers. For Richard, this was not a pursuit of wealth or fame, it was a duty. He saw it as a chance to defend his people's honor and to stand for justice in a time when faith and courage were being tested. The moment he decided to join the great campaign, his court was filled with mixed emotions. Some admired his devotion, others feared the cost. A king's departure from his land meant risk of rebellion, loss, and uncertainty. Yet Richard understood that true greatness demanded stepping beyond comfort. He trusted that a kingdom ruled by righteousness would stand firm even in his absence. His focus was not on the danger ahead, but on the purpose that called him forward. Preparation for the journey was immense. Armies had to be trained, ships had to be built, and supplies gathered for a campaign that would cross continents. Richard personally oversaw every detail. He was not a king who gave orders from a throne. He was a commander who worked beside his men, sharing their burdens. His presence inspired loyalty. Soldiers spoke of him as one of their own, not a distant ruler, but a brother in arms who carried the same hardships they did. Before he left, Richard made sure England would remain strong. He appointed capable administrators, ensured fair governance, and secured peace within his borders. His wisdom was clear. A true leader does not abandon his people even when he leaves their land. He prepared his empire like a builder fortifies a foundation before setting out to raise new walls elsewhere. Every action showed foresight. Every decision revealed balance between courage and responsibility. When the time came to depart, the sight was unforgettable. Great fleets lined the shores, their sails white against the blue horizon. Thousands of soldiers, knights, and volunteers stood ready, united by one vision and one voice. As Richard stood at the head of his men, the wind carried their cheers across the water. It was not just an army sailing east. It was a nation carried by the faith and determination of a king who believed in honor above fear. The journey was perilous. Storms scattered their fleets, illness struck, and supplies ran thin, yet Richard never lost his resolve. He shared the struggles of his men, comforting the sick, encouraging the weary, and leading prayers for strength. His courage in those moments of trial became the force that kept his army's spirit alive. Every hardship forged their unity tighter. Every challenge deepened their trust in the Lionheart. In foreign lands, Richard's reputation preceded him. Kings and nobles of other realms recognized his bravery and his command. Even those who disagreed with his cause respected his integrity. They saw a man who did not fight for greed or conquest, but for purpose. His discipline and fairness earned him allies, while his leadership in battle made him a legend long before the first sword was raised in war. As his army marched closer to the Holy Land, Richard's name became a symbol of strength. His men began to believe that victory was not only possible, but inevitable under his command. Yet Richard's focus was not on personal glory. He often reminded his soldiers that no man, not even a king, achieved greatness alone. Their victories, he said, would belong to their courage, their unity, and their faith in what was right. Along the way, Richard made decisions that showed both wisdom and restraint. He avoided unnecessary battles, sought peace where possible, and protected civilians wherever his forces marched. His leadership was not built on destruction, but on discipline and compassion. Even in the midst of conflict, he believed in maintaining honor, for victory without honor was no victory at all. By the time his fleet reached the shores of the east, Richard had already proven himself to his men and to his nation. The journey itself had tested every part of his being, his strength, his patience, his humility. What awaited him beyond the horizon was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The Lionheart had not come to seek fame. He had come to fulfill a promise of courage and justice that had guided him since the day he first wore the crown. The sun burned fiercely over the sands as Richard's forces approached the great city of Acre. The walls of the city stood like giants, guarded by warriors who refused to surrender. The siege had already lasted months before Richard arrived, and many had begun to lose hope. But when the Lionheart set foot on the battlefield, everything changed. His presence alone reignited the spirit of the weary soldiers. He examined every weakness in the enemy's defense, every flaw in his own camp, and within days, his leadership transformed chaos into order. Richard was not a ruler who stayed behind the lines giving commands. He stood shoulder to shoulder with his men, sword in hand, armor glinting beneath the harsh sun. His courage was contagious. When arrows rained down from the city walls, he did not retreat, he advanced. Soldiers who had been hesitant began to fight with renewed strength. They said that when the king himself stood in the front ranks, fear disappeared from their hearts. Every cry of "For the Lionheart" echoed with purpose. The siege of Acre was brutal. Disease spread, water was scarce, and exhaustion claimed lives daily. Yet Richard never allowed despair to take hold. He ensured that the wounded were cared for, that the hungry were fed before him, and that his men remembered why they fought. His ability to balance compassion with command made him not just a warrior, but a leader of souls. Even when his own body grew weak from illness, he continued to direct strategies from his tent, refusing to rest until victory was within reach. When the time came for the final assault, Richard led from the front once more. The clash of steel filled the air as his forces stormed the gates. The enemy's resistance was fierce, but Richard's determination was greater. With his sword raised high, he drove forward, his battle cry cutting through the noise like thunder. His men followed, inspired by his fearlessness. The siege that had seemed endless finally broke. Acre fell, and the banner of Richard's army was raised high upon its walls. But victory did not make him arrogant. Instead of celebrating conquest, Richard sought peace and fairness. He treated captured soldiers with dignity and allowed the wounded enemies to receive medical care. Such mercy was rare in those days, but Richard understood that true strength lay not in cruelty, but in control. His justice earned him respect not only from his allies, but even from his enemies. It was said that his honor made others see that greatness was not about domination, it was about discipline. After Acre, the road ahead remained long and filled with trials. Yet the victory had reignited belief among his men. The legend of the Lionheart spread across lands and seas, stories of a king who fought beside his soldiers, who endured pain without complaint, and who led with both might and mercy. Those tales traveled faster than his army, and everywhere they went, hearts were stirred with admiration and awe. Richard's discipline in victory was as remarkable as his valor in battle. He refused to allow pride to cloud his judgment. When his men wanted to plunder, he reminded them that wealth gained without righteousness was a curse. When tempers rose among commanders, he calmed them with wisdom. His leadership created unity among people of different nations and languages. Under his banner, they fought as one not just for land, but for honor and principle. He also showed remarkable strategy beyond the battlefield. Instead of rushing into reckless combat, Richard strengthened supply lines, built defensive positions, and negotiated alliances. His mind was as sharp as his sword. Each decision reflected balance between courage and intelligence. His goal was not endless war, but meaningful victory, one that could bring stability rather than endless bloodshed. During the campaigns that followed, Richard's health suffered greatly. The heat, the wounds, and the endless burden of command began to take their toll. But his spirit never weakened. Even when confined to his tent by fever, he continued to plan every move, sending out precise orders that guided his army like the hand of a master chess player. His men often said that though their king's body was weary, his heart burned brighter than ever, a lion's heart that refused to yield. Every step of his journey after Acre reflected the same truth. Greatness is not found in ease, but in endurance. Richard's actions on the battlefield became lessons for generations of leaders who came after him. He had shown that power without justice leads to ruin, and bravery without compassion leads to emptiness. Through every battle, every hardship, and every act of mercy, Richard proved that the true measure of a king was not how he conquered others, but how he conquered himself. After the fall of Acre, Richard's mission did not end. The greater challenge lay ahead, the march toward Jerusalem. The holy city had become the heart of the struggle, a symbol that drew both armies and hearts into conflict. For Richard, this was not just a test of strength, but a trial of faith and endurance. The journey was long and perilous, marked by harsh deserts, blazing sun, and enemies who struck from the shadows. Yet Richard's leadership never wavered. He organized his troops with precision, ensuring discipline in every rank. Food, water, and morale were his priorities, for he knew that an army's victory begins with its spirit before its sword. As they advanced through the barren lands, Richard faced challenges greater than any battlefield could offer. Disease spread through the camp, tempers flared among rival leaders, and many questioned whether the mission could succeed. Still, Richard refused to let despair seep into his men's hearts. He reminded them daily why they fought, not for wealth or fame, but for honor and duty. His words carried a rare power, for they came from a man who lived by what he preached. Even when his body ached and sleep eluded him, his spirit remained steady, giving strength to thousands who followed him. The march tested Richard's intelligence as much as his courage. He knew that brute force alone would not win against an enemy as skilled and determined as Saladin's army. So he began to rely on strategy, moving his forces with care, setting traps for ambushes, and maintaining formation even under surprise attacks. His discipline kept the army united, and his decisions often saved them from disaster. Each step forward was a reminder of his leadership, the kind that guided not through fear, but through respect. When Saladin's forces struck suddenly near Arsuf, it became one of the most defining moments of Richard's campaign. The enemy attacked with precision, surrounding the Crusaders and threatening to break their lines. Panic began to spread, but Richard held his men firm. He ordered them to remain calm, to hold formation, to wait for his signal. Hours passed under a storm of arrows and charges, yet he stood tall, unmoved. And when the moment came, he gave the order, a thunderous counterattack that shattered the enemy ranks and turned near defeat into a brilliant victory. His discipline and control under pressure became legendary. The victory at Arsuf revealed the depth of Richard's genius. It was not only a triumph of arms, but of patience and strategy. Where others might have rushed and fallen into chaos, he waited, analyzed, and struck at the perfect time. His calmness amidst violence inspired awe even among his enemies. Many said that no other commander in the world could have maintained such control when surrounded by death and fear. Richard proved that leadership was not about the loudest voice or the strongest sword, but about the ability to remain composed when everything around you trembles. After Arsuf, the march continued, but each mile grew heavier. Supplies ran low, and the men's strength began to fade. The desert's cruelty showed no mercy, yet Richard turned every hardship into a lesson. When men grew tired, he reminded them of their purpose. When water ran out, he shared what little he had. His willingness to endure what his soldiers endured made him more than a king. He became one of them. In their eyes, he was not a distant ruler, but a brother in arms, walking the same path of sacrifice. Throughout the journey, Richard's interactions with Saladin also became a matter of legend. Though they stood on opposite sides of the battlefield, both leaders displayed respect for one another. Saladin admired Richard's bravery, and Richard respected Saladin's honor. Their exchanges, through letters, gifts, and moments of mutual courtesy, showed the world that even in war, dignity could survive. Richard's ability to recognize humanity in his enemy set him apart from ordinary conquerors. When they finally reached the outskirts of Jerusalem, the dream that had carried them so far stood within reach. Yet Richard faced a decision that would test his soul more than any battle. The city was heavily fortified, His army was weakened, and winter was approaching. To attack could mean disaster, to retreat could mean disappointment. He spent nights in prayer and reflection, seeking the path that would protect his men without dishonor. It was not an easy choice, but he understood that wisdom sometimes means restraint. Ultimately, Richard chose not to attack Jerusalem. To many, it seemed like a loss, but to him, it was an act of responsibility. He could not risk thousands of lives for a symbolic victory that would not last. His decision revealed a rare quality, the strength to walk away from glory for the sake of truth and preservation. This was not weakness. It was maturity born from understanding that leadership is not about pride, but about purpose. The march to Jerusalem became a story not of conquest, but of character. Through hunger, battle, and temptation, Richard showed that true greatness lies in self-control. His ability to balance power with wisdom turned his journey into a lesson for generations, that a true leader does not chase victory blindly, but seeks justice guided by faith and reason. The road to Jerusalem proved that the Lionheart's courage was not only in battle, but in the quiet strength to make the right choice, even when the world expected otherwise. After months of exhausting marches and countless battles, Richard's army reached the point where both sides knew the war could not continue without heavy losses. The desert had drained strength from men and horses alike, and even the bravest warriors longed for peace. Richard understood that this was not just a fight between two kings, but a struggle that had cost thousands of lives. Though he was known as the Lionheart, fierce and unyielding, he was also wise enough to recognize when courage meant seeking peace rather than war. This was the moment when his leadership would be tested not on the battlefield, but at the negotiation table. Richard began to send messages to Salahuddin, the great Muslim leader who had proven to be not just a skilled commander, but a man of deep honor and principle. Despite being adversaries, both kings respected one another. They had seen each other's courage, heard tales of each other's generosity, and understood that neither fought out of hatred but conviction. This mutual respect opened the path to diplomacy. The messengers carried not threats, but proposals, discussions of truce, safe passage, and coexistence. Salahuddin, too, was weary of endless war. His lands had suffered, his people were tired, and his soldiers had fought bravely for years. When he received Richard's offer for peace, he saw wisdom in it. Instead of viewing Richard as a mere enemy, he saw him as a man who valued justice and stability. Thus began one of the most remarkable exchanges in medieval history, a peace negotiation between two of the most powerful and honorable leaders of their time. Throughout the process, Richard showed remarkable patience and intelligence. He did not demand what could not be sustained, nor did he bow to pressure from those who urged him to keep fighting. He focused on realistic goals, ensuring safety for pilgrims, fair treatment for prisoners, and lasting stability in the region. His calm and logical approach impressed even his advisors, many of whom had only known him as a warrior. They now witnessed the statesman within the Lionheart, a man capable of forging peace with as much courage as he waged war. The correspondence between Richard and Salahuddin became legendary. They exchanged gifts as symbols of respect, horses, fruit, and fine fabrics, gestures that reminded both sides that nobility and honor were not bound by religion or nation. These moments of mutual courtesy softened hearts on both sides of the conflict. Soldiers who had once seen each other as enemies began to recognize that behind the armor They were all human beings yearning for the same peace. Finally, after many discussions and exchanges, an agreement was reached. It was decided that Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims would be allowed safe passage to visit the holy sites without fear. This compromise brought relief and satisfaction to many. It was not a victory of conquest, but a victory of reason and compassion. Richard knew that this peace would save countless lives and bring stability to the land. He proved that sometimes the greatest act of strength is choosing restraint. The treaty marked a moment of mutual respect rarely seen in history. Saladin admired Richard's honesty and bravery, while Richard respected Saladin's fairness and discipline. Both leaders kept their word, ensuring that no harm would come to travelers from either side. Their agreement became an example for generations, a reminder that even after bitter war, peace can be achieved through understanding and respect. When the news of peace spread, the soldiers on both sides reacted with mixed emotions. Some rejoiced, thankful to see an end to bloodshed, while others felt uncertain, wondering if their sacrifices had been in vain. But as days passed, it became clear that Richard's decision had brought something far more valuable than another fleeting victory. It had brought stability and hope. The land that had been filled with war cries began to hear prayers once more. As the armies disbanded and the banners were lowered, Richard stood silent, looking out over the horizon. He had fought valiantly, led fearlessly, and negotiated wisely. His journey had been filled with trials that tested not only his sword, but his soul. Through it all, he had learned that leadership was not just about conquering cities, but about uniting hearts. His treaty with Saladin became a symbol of mutual respect between two great civilizations. In the end, the peace Richard achieved was not written only on parchment, but in history itself. It showed the world that honor can exist even between rivals, and that wisdom can bring what force cannot. The Lionheart had proven that true kingship lies not in endless battle, but in knowing when to lay down the sword for the sake of humanity. His legacy as a warrior remained, but now it was joined by something greater, the mark of a peacemaker whose courage reached beyond the battlefield. After securing peace with Saladin, Richard knew his duty in the Holy Land was fulfilled. Yet the journey home would test him more than any battle he had ever fought. The long road back to England was filled with danger, political enemies, treacherous seas, and kingdoms waiting to trap him. Still, Richard remained calm and steadfast. He had faced armies and kings. Now he was prepared to face fate itself. The war had taught him not only how to wield a sword, but how to endure the trials that follow even after the victory. As he set sail from the Holy Land, storms battered his ship, scattering his fleet and forcing him to land in hostile territory. His enemies, who feared his power and envied his fame, watched for any sign of weakness. Disguised and traveling with only a few loyal followers, Richard attempted to pass through Europe quietly. But even in disguise, the Lionheart could not go unnoticed. His courage, bearing, and noble presence betrayed him. He was soon captured by Duke Leopold of Austria, a man who held deep resentment from their earlier encounters during the Crusades. Richard's capture shocked the world. The great warrior king, who had fought side by side with legends and commanded the respect of nations, was now held prisoner in a foreign land. Yet even in captivity his dignity never faded. He did not plead or curse his fate. Instead, he carried himself with the same composure and strength that had guided him in battle. His captors, expecting to find a broken man, were astonished to see a king whose spirit remained unshaken. Leopold soon handed Richard over to Emperor Henry VI of the Holy Roman Empire, who demanded a massive ransom for his release. The sum was enormous, more than any kingdom could easily pay. Back in England, news of Richard's imprisonment spread like wildfire. Many feared that without their king the realm would crumble, but his mother, Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, refused to let despair take root. She took charge of raising the ransom, rallying nobles, church leaders, and common people alike. Gold and silver poured in from every corner of England and beyond, proving that Richard's leadership had earned him not just loyalty, but love. During his imprisonment, Richard showed a rare kind of strength, patience. He knew he could not fight his way out of this prison, as he had from battlefields. Instead, he used wisdom, faith, and diplomacy. He treated his captors with respect, earning their grudging admiration. Even in chains, his words carried authority. He spoke of justice, of the value of keeping one's word, and of the futility of greed. His captors began to see him not just as a ransom to exploit, but as a king destined for greatness. Meanwhile, in England, people sold their possessions and offered whatever they could to free their king. Monks prayed, nobles contributed fortunes, and even farmers brought coins they had saved for years. The unity that Richard's reign had inspired was now visible in action. For the first time, the entire kingdom moved as one, bound not by force, but by devotion. It was proof that Richard's leadership had reached far beyond the battlefield. It had touched the hearts of his people. After months of waiting, the ransom was finally paid. Richard's release became a moment of triumph not just for him, but for all of England. When he stepped out of captivity, weakened but unbroken, his first words were not of anger or revenge. Instead, he thanked Allah for giving him the strength to endure, and for surrounding him with people loyal enough to bring him home. His humility in that moment was as powerful as his bravery in war. Upon his return to England, Richard was received with joy and reverence. The people lined the streets to welcome him, their cheers echoing through the cities. Though he had been absent for years, his legend had only grown stronger. He immediately set about restoring order, settling disputes, and rebuilding what had weakened during his absence. He did not waste time boasting of his hardships. Instead, he returned to his duty as a servant of justice and protector of his realm. His captivity had changed him. The man who returned to England was wiser and more reflective. He understood now that true strength lay not only in conquest, but in endurance, forgiveness, and the ability to rise after being brought low. The chains had tested his character more than any sword ever could, and he had emerged purified by struggle. His people saw not just a warrior, but a king who had faced humiliation without losing his honor. Richard's journey from glory to captivity and back to freedom became one of the most powerful examples of perseverance in history. He had fought enemies abroad, endured betrayal, survived imprisonment, and still returned as the rightful ruler of England. His life stood as a testament that greatness is not defined by how high one rises, but by how firmly one stands when the world tries to bring him down. Even in the darkest moments, the Lionheart never let the flame of his courage fade. When Richard returned to England after his captivity, he found a realm that needed his firm hand and clear vision once again. The kingdom had suffered in his absence. Rival nobles had seized lands. Political intrigue had weakened the crown's authority, and threats from neighboring powers loomed large. Yet Richard did not return with bitterness or vengeance. He came back as a leader tempered by hardship, a king whose time in captivity had refined his wisdom and deepened his understanding of leadership. He knew that rebuilding strength required more than fear. It demanded unity, justice, and integrity. One of Richard's first acts was to restore order among the nobles who had grown restless. He called them to council, not to punish, but to remind them of their duties. His words carried the weight of experience, his presence the authority of a man who had faced both victory and chains. Many who once doubted him found themselves humbled in his presence. He did not seek revenge against those who had betrayed him during his absence. Instead, he sought to rebuild their loyalty through fairness and example. It was this ability to forgive without forgetting that made his leadership enduring. Richard also turned his attention to strengthening the royal administration. Years of neglect had left the treasury strained and the laws inconsistently enforced. He reformed the collection of taxes, re-established royal justice, and ensured that corruption was punished without mercy. Yet, unlike many kings, he did not seek wealth for himself. Every coin collected was used to rebuild fortresses, improve defenses, and restore stability to the land. He understood that power without responsibility was a curse, and that a ruler's duty was to serve, not to rule for pleasure. Despite his focus on governance, Richard's heart remained that of a warrior. He began fortifying England's coasts and castles to protect against possible invasions, especially from France. His mind was as sharp as ever, and his strategies reflected the discipline of years spent in command. He personally inspected defenses, issued new codes for the army, and ensured that the land was ready for any threat. But unlike his earlier days, his motives were not conquest, they were preservation. He had learned that a strong kingdom is not one that conquers others, but one that cannot be easily broken. Richard's relationship with his people deepened during this period. He traveled through towns and villages, listening to grievances, offering justice, and ensuring that the poor were protected. His years of struggle had made him more compassionate, more aware of the common man's pain. The people, in turn, saw in him not just a king, but a guardian. Songs and ballads about the Lionheart spread through England, celebrating his bravery, wisdom, and mercy. He had become a living legend, a ruler both feared and loved, admired not only for his strength, but for his sense of honor. He also worked to strengthen England's position abroad through diplomacy. Instead of waging endless wars, he built alliances based on trust and respect. He negotiated with neighboring rulers, sent envoys to secure peace, and used his influence to maintain stability across his territories. These were not the actions of a reckless conqueror, but of a seasoned leader who understood that lasting power comes through wisdom, not bloodshed. Every decision he made reflected the lessons learned through hardship, patience, foresight, and restraint. Yet, even as peace settled over his lands, Richard never allowed himself to grow complacent. He continued to train his soldiers, improve trade, and prepare for any threat that might rise. He often reminded his advisors that strength is lost the moment one believes it can never be taken. His discipline and vigilance kept England secure and his people confident. He had transformed from a fiery warrior into a balanced ruler, one who could lead with both sword and sense. Throughout his reign after captivity, Richard's character shone brightest in moments of challenge. When disputes arose among nobles or territories, he handled them with fairness rather than fury. When opportunities came for personal gain, he chose the path of integrity. He had learned that true kingship meant serving a higher moral purpose, justice, stability, and the welfare of his people. These qualities elevated him above the ordinary rulers of his age, marking him as a man whose greatness came from his character, not just his crown. As years passed, his reputation spread beyond England, across Europe, and even in lands once his enemies. His name was spoken with admiration. Saladin himself, long after their peace, was said to have honored Richard as a man of unmatched courage and sincerity. Such respect between two former foes showed how deeply Richard's honor had impressed even those who once fought against him. His example became a bridge of understanding between cultures that had long seen only conflict. Through his leadership, discipline, and justice, Richard restored England's strength and dignity. He had faced betrayal, captivity, and war, yet he rose above them all with unwavering faith and courage. The Lionheart, who once conquered cities, had now conquered something greater, the hearts of his people. His later years as king proved that true greatness is not only achieved through battle, but through the ability to lead with wisdom, fairness, and humility after the battle is done. As the years passed, Richard's reign entered its final chapter, marked by wisdom born from hardship and experience forged in fire. He had returned from captivity stronger in spirit, more thoughtful in leadership, and deeply aware of how fragile peace could be. Yet his restless heart could never remain still for long. Even as his kingdom prospered, threats lingered beyond its borders, particularly from France. King Philip Roman II of France, once his ally, had become his greatest rival. Richard understood that to preserve England's security, he had to remain vigilant and decisive, and so, once again, the warrior within him stirred. Though he sought peace wherever possible, Richard knew that sometimes peace required strength. He began reinforcing England's continental territories, building fortresses that would stand as symbols of stability and deterrence. Among these, shaped, Augelard in Normandy became his masterpiece, a fortress so strong and well designed that it was said to be years ahead of its time. Richard oversaw its construction personally, guiding architects and soldiers with the precision of both a strategist and a builder. It stood not only as a defense against invasion, but as a testament to his enduring vision of power balanced by intelligence. But while he fortified his lands, he never allowed pride to overtake reason. He governed with fairness, ensuring that even those who once opposed him received justice. He sought to reconcile disputes through negotiation rather than immediate violence, preferring stability over conquest. His experiences had taught him that wars may win territories, but peace wins hearts. This maturity set him apart from many rulers of his age, who ruled with greed or cruelty. Richard ruled with purpose to protect his people and preserve his honor. Still, his rivalry with King Philip could not remain silent forever. Skirmishes broke out across the borders of Normandy and Aquitaine. Richard led his forces with the same courage that had earned him the title of Lionheart, yet with a calmer mind than in his youth. He studied the movements of his enemies, planned every campaign carefully, and struck only when victory was certain. His discipline turned potential disasters into decisive triumphs. Even his enemies began to acknowledge that Richard's strength lay not just in courage, but in the clarity of his judgment. During this time, Richard also showed an unusual humility for a man of such power. He often reminded his men that victories were not achieved by the sword alone, but by the will of Allah, who gives and takes success as he pleases. He treated his soldiers with respect, shared their hardships, and ensured they were rewarded for their loyalty. His leadership was not one of distance, but of closeness. He led from among his people, not above them. This earned him a loyalty that no threat or bribe could break. As the conflicts with France continued, Richard's health began to wane. Years of battle and long campaigns had taken their toll, but he refused to retreat into comfort. He spent his days inspecting fortifications, riding through the countryside, and ensuring that justice and order were maintained. Even in pain, he continued to fulfill his duties as a king. Those around him were astonished by his resilience. He seemed unbreakable, a man whose strength came not from his body but from his unwavering spirit. In 1199, while inspecting one of his fortresses in Limousin, Richard received word of hidden treasure being hoarded by a rebellious noble. True to his nature, he went personally to investigate. During the siege of the small castle of Chalice-Chabrol, as he walked the front lines without armor, a crossbow bolt struck him in the shoulder. At first, he dismissed the wound as minor, but infection soon set in, and the great warrior who had survived countless battles found himself brought low by a single arrow. Even in his final days, Richard displayed extraordinary calm and grace. He forgave the young archer who had shot him, refusing to let anger cloud his final moments. He spoke to his followers with strength, reminding them to remain loyal to justice and truth. His composure inspired all who witnessed it. There was no fear in his eyes, only peace, the peace of a man who had lived with courage, led with honor, and met his fate with dignity. As his life slipped away, Richard's thoughts turned to his people and his faith. He asked to be remembered not for the wars he fought, but for the principles he upheld: courage, discipline, and mercy. Those who stood beside him wept, for they knew they were losing not just a king, but a man whose soul had been shaped by struggle and sanctified by forgiveness. His final words were said to be of gratitude to his Creator for granting him strength to live and die with honor. When news of Richard's death spread, it was felt across nations. Even his enemies mourned him, for they knew that a true leader had passed. Saladin's heirs and King Philip alike paid respect to the fallen Lionheart. His legacy outlived him, echoing through generations as the story of a king who embodied courage without cruelty, power without arrogance, and leadership without tyranny. In life and in death, Richard had proven that greatness is not in how long one reigns, but in how one's actions continue to inspire after the crown has fallen. Long after Richard's passing, his name became more than just a memory. It became a symbol. Across England and beyond, stories of his courage, wisdom, and mercy were told around fires and in royal courts. To some, he was the warrior king who fought fearlessly for his land and his faith. To others, he was the noble leader who forgave his enemies and led his men with honor. His life was not without faults or failures, but that is what made his legacy powerful, because it showed that true greatness is not perfection, but persistence in the face of imperfection. Richard's journey became a living lesson that courage means standing tall, even when the world turns against you. His story continued to inspire generations of rulers, knights, and common men alike. Whenever England faced adversity, people recalled the Lionheart's strength, how he had faced imprisonment, betrayal, and war, yet never lost his sense of purpose. His example became a guiding light for those who believed that leadership is not given by the crown, but earned by the heart. His reign taught that victory is hollow without justice, and that honor shines brightest when tested by hardship. The echo of his life became a reminder that true power lies in moral strength, not just military might. In literature and song, Richard was immortalized as the embodiment of bravery and chivalry. Poets wrote of his battles in the Holy Land, and minstrels sang of his valor on distant shores. Children grew up hearing of the king who fought lions and led armies with unwavering courage. These stories were not just tales of conquest, they were parables of faith, loyalty, and endurance. His legend grew larger than life, yet at its core remained deeply human. The same man who conquered cities also knelt in prayer. The same warrior who defeated enemies also forgave them. His influence extended even into the moral fabric of leadership. Many kings after him looked to his example, realizing that to rule a people requires more than a sword. It requires the heart of a servant. Richard had demonstrated that leadership was about lifting others higher, not pushing them lower. His decisions, though sometimes costly, were guided by conviction rather than convenience. That spirit of unwavering resolve became a foundation upon which future English monarchs built their authority. Even centuries later, his courage became a measuring stick for kings who sought to prove themselves worthy of the crown. Beyond the battlefield, Richard's legacy shaped the culture of knighthood and honor in Europe. The code of chivalry, which emphasized bravery, mercy, and loyalty, found one of its truest reflections in his life. Knights were taught to fight bravely, but to show compassion in victory, lessons drawn directly from Richard's conduct during the Crusades. He had treated his prisoners with fairness and refused unnecessary cruelty. This combination of might and mercy set a precedent that would echo throughout medieval Europe, influencing generations of warriors who sought to balance strength with righteousness. Even his mistakes were valuable lessons. Historians often reflected on how his time in captivity showed the danger of pride and the price of impulsive action. Yet those same experiences revealed his endurance and humility. He emerged from hardship wiser, understanding that a ruler's greatest weapon is not fear, but understanding. His ability to learn from his own failures made his story not just heroic, but relatable. It showed that even kings must grow, and that every challenge carries within it the seed of transformation. In the centuries that followed, his name continued to be invoked whenever courage was needed. During wars, soldiers found strength in his memory. During peace, leaders sought to emulate his justice. Monuments were built in his honor, and his name became synonymous with strength and faith. The English people, proud of their heritage, regarded him as a symbol of what their nation stood for: bravery, resilience, and honor. His heart, literally and symbolically, became a treasure of England, enshrined as a reminder of the greatness that flows from courage guided by conscience. Artists painted him, writers reimagined him, and storytellers passed his tale through generations. Each retelling kept alive not only his deeds but also the deeper meaning behind them, that faith, courage, and justice must always walk together. His story became a moral compass, urging people to fight for what is right, to lead with integrity, and to remain steadfast even when hope seems lost. It is through these retellings that his spirit transcended history and became timeless. In time, even those beyond England came to respect him. His name was known in lands far from his own, not merely as a conqueror, but as a man who held to his values amidst the chaos of power. Muslim chroniclers of the Crusades recorded his fairness and courage, describing him as a man of honor, a rare acknowledgment in an age defined by conflict. Such respect from both allies and opponents testified to the universal nature of his greatness. His character bridged divides that swords could not, proving that respect, once earned through integrity, outlives any victory won through violence. Thus, King Richard's legacy became eternal not because of the lands he conquered, but because of the hearts he touched and the principles he embodied. His story outlived his empire, carried by the wind of time into every corner of the world. He remains a symbol of how a leader should live, strong yet humble, fierce yet fair, powerful yet merciful. His life, with all its triumphs and trials, reminds us that true kingship is not found in castles or crowns, but in the courage to stand for truth, even when standing alone. Centuries have passed since the Lionheart walked this earth, but his spirit still speaks to those who seek strength, faith, and purpose. His story reminds us that a true leader does not conquer for pride. He conquers to bring justice, unity, and hope. In every struggle, whether on the battlefield or in life, remember Richard's lesson. Your power is not in your crown, your wealth, or your army. It is in your heart. The heart that refuses to surrender, even when the world stands against you, will always find victory written in its destiny.